Lord McConnell, you're here in Berlin once again in honor of 21 years of the fall of the Berlin Wall for our conference, A World Without Walls. We're dealing this week with the topics peace building and reconciliation. How, as you reflect on the field of cultural diplomacy, do you see the need for cultural diplomacy? Is there a need for cultural diplomacy in today's interdependent world? And if there is a need, where is that need?
Well, I think it's really good that this weekend we've focused on not just on cultural diplomacy between the old East and West of Europe, and not just between Europe and the Middle East or the whole issues around Afghanistan, Pakistan, that part of Asia. But we've also been looking at the relationship between the North and the South. And I think cultural diplomacy has got a fundamental role to play if we're trying to create a more equal and a more successful and a more secure world in this interdependent world in which we now live. We have to have a far greater understanding and celebration of the cultures of Latin America, of Africa, of Southeast Asia. These regions of the world are growing. They are going to be increasingly politically influential in the years to come. And the peoples in these regions are just as important as we are. And until we have a full understanding, I think, of their cultures, where they're coming from, and we celebrate that difference in a very positive way, then the kind of relationships that will help our world be more secure, but also much more successful and equal in the years to come, will not be possible.
So it sounds as if you're speaking about almost a new chapter in the evolution of cultural diplomacy. Cultural diplomacy of the past, as we know, was more about promoting Alliance Française, British Council, bringing these cultures abroad. It almost sounds like you're asking for the opposite, in the sense more of an exchange, more of a listening. Is that true, or how would you see the methods of cultural diplomacy adapting to the regions that you're speaking about?
I think the old form of cultural diplomacy, almost sort of post-colonial cultural diplomacy, provided a bridge perhaps between the colonial times and the world that we live in today, and was also perhaps affected by the existence of the Cold War and the tensions that created and the interest that created around the world. We live in a very, very different world today, and we're going to live in a much more different world in the decades to come. And cultural diplomacy has to be as much about learning as it is about promoting, as much about listening as it is about talking. It has to be about understanding the rest of the world, not just promoting our values and our experiences, although that's important for our pride, for our identity, and for the contribution that we can make to the world, but just about that understanding that there are other contributions out there, and they are equally as valid. They are just as important for people's identity, and it's only when all of those different cultures, identities, those contributions are celebrated and used effectively and shared that we will truly have not just an interdependent world developing economically, but a genuinely interdependent world where decision making, where power, influence, security, prosperity is genuinely shared as well.
And how would you see this interrelating with this concept of soft power? Since the election of Obama, we've heard a lot of talk soft power, now that Hillary Clinton's smart power. Is cultural diplomacy about power? How does soft power interrelate with cultural diplomacy in the next chapter of today's interdependent world?
Well, all international relations, in my view, have to be a combination of two things. We all have our own national self-interests, and in today's world, smart power definitely much more successful in promoting those interests than simply hard power. And I think realising that, understanding that is critical, and I welcome the fact that the American administration is now one of the most vocal proponents of that style of international relations. But I also think it's critically important that we understand that we all coexist, that the national self-interest is no longer enough, and that we have to also look at the interests of others, ensuring that others have the means and the resources and the capacities to be stable, strong, developing. That's particularly important in my view between the North and the South, but the same rules, the same approach needs to be used between Europe and Asia, between North America and Asia. I think across the piece, if we can do that, then we will create a far better balance in international relations. which will ultimately be in the self-interest of our children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, because they will live in a safer world as a result.
It's true. I think in essence the foreign policies of governments today need to be humble enough to recognize it's about relationships. We can't do it alone. If we have a chance of solving global climate change, terrorism, poverty, the only way is through cooperation, and therefore we need relationships based on trust. So I think in terms of what you're saying, that seems to be the current realization. It's more about soft power. It's more about strengthening relationships. The final question that I have for you is related to the next generation. Luckily, we've had a wonderful group here this week, about 150 participants from around the world, really very much representing the next generation of leaders from the cultural field, the political field, and the economic field. If you could give them a message to take home from this event, to empower them in terms of maybe their responsibility in this new world that they're going to be working in very soon, what would that message be to the next generation of young leaders?
Well, the reason that I am here, and the reason I came back, having been here last year, the reason that I've joined the advisory board at ICD is because ICD is bringing together a truly multinational group of young people genuinely concerned in international relations, with a wide variety of opinions, a very wide variety of backgrounds and experiences, many in more than one country, and those young people will be the future of international relations, diplomacy, maybe even politics in the years to come. And I think that the kind of values, the openness to discussion and dialogue, the ability to listen as well as to contribute to these discussions that each of these young people have is going to be absolutely vital for their personal success, but more importantly for the world that we live in. And I enjoyed this week's event yet again because it's an opportunity to influence that thought, but also to learn something from them too, because they are the future, and they have ideas of their own that my generation needs to listen to.
Well, allow me to speak on behalf of the entire Institute for Cultural Diplomacy to thank you, Lord McConnell, for your sustained engagement in the Institute through the advisory board, and in particular with the next generation of leaders. I think you've served as a role model and an inspiration for many, and this weekend proves to continue that tradition. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.